have to do it official again, so welcome once more to the Healing Arts Encounters in Art and Medicine here at the Berlin University of the Arts with our two renowned guests. And I start introducing the first one, the medical expert. That's Dr. Adak Pirmorady Sehouli, who is a psychoanalyst and a medical doctor for psychosomatic medicine and psychotherapy. She currently heads the University Outpatient Clinic at the Benjamin Franklin campus of the Charité. In addition to being a psychoanalyst, she holds also a master degree in cultural studies, and she is chair of the board of the European Artists Guild for Medicine and Culture, and she's very deeply committed to the integration of cultural aspects in the medicine. We met just a few months ago. I've already heard of you and I've read of you, but we met at the Art and Medicine Symposium at the Charité a few months where I had the honor to see your first presentation. I'm very thrilled that you are with us tonight. And then we have Professor Dr. Natasha Kelly with us, a dear colleague, here at the Berlin University of the Arts, where she currently holds the Professorship for Cultural Studies as part of the Studium Generale, started this semester. And Natasha is a polymath, an author and editor of many books, a curator and a visual artist involved in all kinds of fields of art. Her works, installations were shown across various diverse museums all over the place throughout Germany. Natasha, you hold a PhD and MA in Communication Studies and Sociology, so that's the academic backdrop. And your most recent book, it's called Schwarz, Deutsch, Weiblich, Warum Feminismus mehr als Geschlechtergerechtigkeit fordern muss. So Black, German and Female, Why Feminism demands more gender justice. Yeah. And in this book, basically Natasha shows how elitism and also racist prejudices have very long dominated like Western feminist discourse, preventing a feminism that is actually open to all. That's kind of one of the key points that you're trying to make. And in order to change this, you use personal and collective experiences and historical highlights to tell the story of black feminism in Germany. And also interesting for the night, it combines very biographical narratives with very structural analysis in this book in a very brilliant way. And you've taught at many different universities, and as I said, you're now here at the UDK. Thank you for joining us for this last session. That said, I would like to ask Adak to the stage. Please give a warm applause to Adak Pirmorady Sehouli. Sorry guys, this is PowerPoint here. I guess, no? No.
Geh hier auf am besten Bildschirmpräsentation. Wo ist jetzt hin? Ja, genau. Anzeige dauert geht auch. Kannst du einfach.
Oder?
Ja. Oder ist da drüber? Geh einfach auf. Da musst du das eigentlich so.
Okay,
ja?
perfect.
Okay. So, thank you very much, Lukas, and thank you, Natasha, for the further dialogue. My name is Adak Pirmorady, and I'm very happy to talk to you today about the meaning of culture in medicine. So, starting with the current situation in medicine, we are working at the Charité in a really high-quality medicine. We are able to make a lot of diagnostic. We are making treatments who are very with innovation. They are wonderful. So we are maybe glad to live this time and are able to treat our patients like that. But why? The question is, why do we have easy to fix problems? Who are still there. For example, it's really difficult for doctors to talk about sexuality. I don't know why, but studies maybe 10 years ago show the same results like today. Doctors are not able to talk about sexuality with their patients, for example, in the aftercare, with cancer patients, for example. why do we have such problems? Or you have sometimes the gap that doctors forget to involve the social service after operation if the patient has to go home. So this is something that maybe on the checklist medicine that we are doing is not really included, so I don't know. But talking about culture and, for example, art in medicine is something that we need to have a holistic point of view as physicians with our patients. And my background, I'm coming from the psychoanalysis, so I studied very long, and I have a hard education, lying down at the sofa, and my psychoanalyst behind me was not talking to me because I was talking. And I learned that it needs long way to touch the unconsciousness. And in psychoanalysis, it's really important to touch this unconsciousness because we have this theory that there is a lot of things that we are not able to catch because they make anxiety or they make aggressivity, and all this stuff, all these feelings and emotions are not really good if we're trying to work or trying to be functional. So we work a lot on this topic to try to make the unconsciousness conscious. And it's not possible, but we can try to understand something. And if we are working with our patients, we try to find the psychodynamic behind the disease or behind the symptom. And we have the theory that a disease or a symptom is a solution. So the idea is there is pressure in the system. We don't know where the pressure is coming from, but we try to understand the origin of this pressure. Maybe it's an inner soul conflict, or maybe it's a social conflict. So in medicine, all the physicians learn the concept of biopsychosocial anamnesis, or we have to think holistic, but I'm not sure how it works really in the emergency room or in the situation on the ward in the hospital. But we have to think as physicians, all of us, not just the psychosomatic doctors or the psychiatrists, we all have to think holistic. Okay. So this is nothing new. We all know that in history, healing processes were tried by painting, or you see here the shaman who tries to heal with rhythm and music. And you see here the paintings in the cave of Lascaux, where people try to work with the anxiety because of the god of the underworld. And so maybe you know the medicus in the Oriental medicine, it was really very common to work with dreams and to try to treat in a holistic way. And this knowledge is so old and so easy that we maybe lost it in a way today in a really high quality medicine. So Sigmund Freud later, he tried to explain the psyche of a human being with this concept of the ego, superego, and it. And he said, it's obviously that we have tensions in the system because all these instances are fighting against each other, because the ego, superego, has another willing than the it, so they are fighting. So this is something that's nothing special. But while working or while trying to deal with our children or family, we don't need this tension. So we have to find our way to get rid of them. And for me, in my career, I'm working now maybe 15, 20 years in medicine, I learned something. So I showed you, I lay there maybe 6 years trying to touch the unconsciousness. And unconsciousness, in English, this word has a big meaning, but in German we say Unbewusstes. That means just this unconsciousness that Sigmund Freud tried to explain. And later I recognized that there is a way which is much faster, because art and cultural aspects sometimes touches us so fast, because we have experiences with them, with a song, or sometimes it's a picture, or it's a smell that touches us, and something from the unconsciousness comes to the mind. And myself, I went once to a writing therapy. A woman, Susanne Diem, she's a creative writer and therapist. She comes to the gynecological wards once in the month, and I went there as well with my patients. And I was sitting there, and I wrote lyrics, and I was flashed how fast I touches topics that I didn't touch in this 6-7 years in my education in psychoanalysis. And then I recognized this is a power that we can use for our patient. And in psychosomatic medicine, we are doing that all the time, because we need the art therapies, we need music therapy, we need the painting therapy, the body therapies. This is very common for us. But I hope that we can try to show the other physicians and the other ones. So I have a colleague here from the Rehabilitationsmedizin, so I was so glad to see him, because it's so important that physicians recognize that it's not possible to heal a person without the knowledge of the unconsciousness or even the psychodynamic processes. And with my colleague, it's often really interesting, because we are able to talk and we are able to look at each other at our eyes, because we have colleagues, they are running away when they see a psychosomatic doctor on the ward, because they're afraid they have to talk. So I think we need this kind of knowledge in medicine again, because I have the feeling that it's in a way lost. And that's why we have this organization, the European Art Guild for Medicine and Culture, and now Anne Berghöfer's here. We have this network, Arts and Medicine from the Charité, and we're working really hard on it to make the medicine understand that we need culture, we need the cultural background of our patients, we need art therapies, not just in psychosomatic or psychiatry. And I think a big problem is we are working in an evidence-based medicine. And I think Lukas is always saying, please don't correlate apples with beers. But in medicine, we need reproductive studies to act with the therapy ideas. But medicine is not just a science. Medicine comes from philosophy, and it's not just a checklist work that we are doing. That bonding after birth is good for the mother and child. This is nothing that we have to prove. This is normal. You don't have to study medicine to say, okay, it's good to make bonding. Bonding is when you put the baby after birth on the breast of the mother. This is normal. So, but we are at the moment in this situation, we have to prove everything. We have to prove that creative therapy is necessary and good. And in a way, I understand that thinking, but I miss the open mind and the flexibility that the way of medicine that we are currently doing here in Europe, and especially in Germany, is not the only right way. And the interesting thing, this is maybe the last thing I want to tell you. Hans Berger was a physician. He developed the EEG, which we are using still today for showing if a patient have epilepsy. And he was thinking that telepathy exists, and he wanted to prove that. And his whole life he was working on proving this telepathy is there. But at the end he failed, and his suicide. He was at the end of his life really, for himself, not successful, and he made suicide. And it's so interesting because at the end of the day he created the EEG. And if you're asking me, I don't know if telepathy exists, and it's not important for me, but he was open-minded. He tried something and he found something really important for medicine. And I think we need a little bit more openness for other forms of therapy. And creative therapy, for me, are absolutely necessary in medicine for understanding the unconsciousness, like I said, and challenging tensions, supporting healing processes, and so at the end we have higher therapeutic outcomes for our patients. So that's it. Thank you very much, and yeah.
Natasha.
Yes. Oh, ich habe einen Rechtschreibfehler, sehe ich gerade.
And a warm applause, please.
I have a spelling mistake, and it's actually about writing, so what an intro, huh? Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for the invitation, Lukas, to be here, and thank you for your introductory words, Adak. I think that it literally ties into what I'm actually going to say, what I'm actually going to talk about, and. But first, I really want to also add, Lukas, that I think that this is a beautiful space, that it is really an important space, because what I'm going to say is now literally coming from the other side of the system, so to say, but still connects with what Adak says. So I think that's really, really beautiful. So I'm looking at coming from the artsy side, looking at writing as not only as an artistic practice, but also as a feminist practice. And maybe it's important to understand what my understanding of feminism is, but I hope that we'll get to there at the end in 10 minutes, that you understand that feminism for me is also a form of healing, also a voice, to be able to voice yourself, to be able to get an inner or articulate your inner voice is something that literally ties into this, into the subconscious and gives voice to the subconscious. But it's also not only creative and artistic, but also very political. And it's like Bell Hooks once said, or Audre Lorde said, or all black feminists say actually, is self-care is warfare. So actually healing and looking after yourself, taking care of yourself, taking resting in resistance is actually part of the anti-racist and anti-sexist project. But looking at writing as the actual creative form, I wanted to start with a historical approach, that writing has always been the foundation of this feminist resistance, black feminist resistance. And it really goes back to the early 18th century, where authors like Phyllis Wheatley would write poems at a time where women were not even allowed to write, and black women for sure not allowed to write. Black women were not even allowed to learn to read and write, let alone write in public or in public spaces or in salons as they were later created. And but she wrote poems, she wrote poetry, she wrote from the bottom of her soul, so to say, if you want to understand poetry, not in a Eurocentric sense, but in more coming from an Afrocentric perspective as being exactly that, the inner voice that is brought out. And Sojourner Truth is here in this row as well, although Sojourner Truth never wrote herself. And she is really an example of a black woman in the late 18th, early 19th century who never learned to read and write. But what is astonishing is that Sojourner Truth, she was a traveling speaker, traveling feminist who spoke for the rights of women in general, but especially for the rights of black women. And her speeches were recorded, and they were recorded from different perspectives. They were recorded by other white women, but also other white men. So you could see that these speeches, although they were the same speech, are actually transcribed and differently, depending on the political intention that these reporters, that they would have. So here also shows the effect of writing as something that is a form of communication that actually builds power structures. And speaking from my perspective, it is then also becomes something what you can use to deconstruct these power structures. And the power structures are not only on the outside, in the world, in the realm, in the power matrix that we are in, but we also internalize them. So this is literally where also the healing, how it goes, it starts within and not on the outside. Important to mention also Anna Julia Cooper, who was then the very first black feminist to publish a book in the United States. Just vollständigkeitshalber, I don't know how to say that in English, but that you've heard her name, it's important, yeah. And Mary Church Terrell, who also not only wrote her biography, but also she wrote, she would travel Europe. She also was in Germany. She many times in the late 19th century, and she would write a diary and also letters. So this is also a form of writing. It's not necessarily reduced to books, but starts as poems, as letters, as diary, as journal entries that also become a form of the self connecting with the subconscious, and then offering it to your reader in the form of a book and publicizing it. Mary Church Terrell, she was in Berlin in 1904, and this was important for me to mention because when I talk about black feminism, everybody always thinks, oh, that's in the United States or something. No, black feminists were here too, in Germany. Mary Church Terrell was maybe one of the early feminists, black feminists. She was at the International Congress for Black Women in 1904. And I brought a quote from her speech where she says, "If anyone had had the courage to predict 50 years ago that a woman with African blood in her vein would journey from the United States to Berlin, Germany to address an international congress of women in the year 1904, he would have either been laughed to scorn or he would have been immediately confined in an asylum for the hopelessly insane." And because now I'm spotting my own mistakes, right? There's another one in that text. But so viel zum Schreiben. Ne? Why I mention this is because I think that it's self-reflection. But anyway, why I mention this and why I mention also Mary Church Terrell is because these ideas are intersectional ideas that were introduced into the German feminist context as early as 1904. And writing is a feminist practice, and it always has been. It always has been a way for women to actually articulate themselves in a world where we didn't have a voice, you know? And I think that coming from a black perspective, this has also always happened in Germany too, what we often don't take into consideration. And I'm going to leap now into the 20th century, the mid-20th century, but I'm going to come back to the 18th century in a minute, where I think the first book by black feminists was actually Farbe-Bekennen in 1986. And I think that this book, just for a short description, it was the first publication by Maya Yim, Katharina Oguntoye, and Dagmar Schulz. And Maya Yim and Katharina Oguntoye were actually the founders of the black the black community in Germany, which we still live and experience today. And this community was founded in the feminist movement based on the research for this book. So it was also writing is also about writing yourself into existence. This is the power of writing also as a creative form of art, but also it's it's seen in a Eurocentric setting as something very theoretical, no? That you're that anything that is real or that is true has to be in writing, otherwise people don't believe it or won't understand it. This is a very typical Eurocentric approach to knowledge in general. If you think of African communities who are more oral communities, storytelling, if you have the griots or jellies who would in performance tell you their morals and truths, for example. This is a complete different approach to your inner self, to your soul, and to soul searching also than in a Eurocentric setting. But I believe that back in the 80s and 1980s, these women understood that to become part of German society, they needed to actually write themselves into existence. And that's how the book Farbe-Bekennen finally came about. And it's a collection of essays from different black women of different generations, leading right back to German colonialism, where survivors of National Socialism and members of former colonial migrant families actually share their experiences with words and with, in different essays, but also in poems. And academic works are also in this book. And this book, since 1986, has been the groundbreaking and foundational work for our community. And I believe that every young black, especially women, but not only, person who joins the community and gains political consciousness bumps into this book earlier than later and starts reading and reflecting and coming to the awareness that we actually have shared experiences. What we formerly thought were very isolated experiences, being a very small community in Germany. You know? There is a long tradition starting from the 1986 of black feminist literature, although it's not actually officially accepted as a genre, I must add, by, for example, the book fair or something. I'm constantly fighting to tell them, no, it's actually its own thing. Can we have our own genre, please, of Afro-German literature? But you'll see in a minute why that's actually quite ridiculous. But since then, books that stand in this tradition of writing as a form of healing, as a form of feminist practice, have been constantly published in German, in a German context. Some of them, like Schwarzer Feminismus, work with translations, translations from black US American feminists or African American feminists, like I mentioned, like bell hooks. And bell hooks is really important to mention in this context, because bell hooks is a psychoanalyst, I would say. Although she's a cultural critique, she bases a lot of her work, a lot of her feminist work is rooted in psychoanalysis. And she's a pedagogue, so an educator, and her educational praxis is the practice of freedom, as she calls it. And what she means with that is actually the inner practice of freedom, a practice of peace. That was German and English. I don't even know if you noticed, but I did. Anyway, it's the practice of freedom. And when she talks about freedom, she's actually talking about the inner peace as a holistic feminist approach to oneself, of gaining freedom with yourself, because the self, the inner self, is being disrupted from the outside, through racist, discriminatory experiences, sexism, and all the other isms in the world, which then intersect with each other, or can intersect with each other. And this is a tradition that, although many black women do not mention it specifically, but this is definitely something that plays into all of these works since then, including my own. And I had to, not that I want to showcase my own work here, but I wanted to, I will anyway, but what I wanted to actually highlight is that these, apart from the last book, which Lukas just now mentioned, these are all collective works which I was able to publish, especially the both Sisters and Souls series. It's works that I worked with young black women who used writing to confront the structures and their own inner pain, you can actually say, to deal with their experiences with being black, being women, being not accepted, being discriminated against in this society, in a white majority society. And these two books, The Sisters and Souls, they actually were the basis for a performance, which we then put on stage. So books are very two-dimensional, but then the spoken word, or even spoken word as a form of art, also involves the body, which is the center of that, of feminist work, actually, is that dealing with the body, understanding your body, and I mean body not only in the physical sense, but really body, mind, and soul as an entire construction, as a holistic understanding of what body is. When you say body in a German context, people will usually think of the physical, just arms and legs and so on, but it also is the spiritual, it's belief, it's religion, it's sexuality, it's identity in the broader context. Is all tied to the body in whichever way, and it's also intergenerational, so it's in your DNA, so it's trauma that we carry, that we gain by birth, not even wanting or having done anything ourselves. So the moment of bonding includes a lot more than just bonding physically and with your parents, or your mother in that case, but also becoming a being in the world, also with your spirit, your mind, your soul, and everything that then is no longer on the inside, but then on the outside, if that makes sense. This book was a book that, which was also a collective work, which I have to mention. It was a film. I made a film. That's what I do as well, make films. And it was a documentary film for the Berlin Biennial. And in this film, I interviewed 8 black women artists, black German women artists, black German artists who were intergenerational. So the youngest was 20 and the oldest was 60. So there's 40 years between them. And that actually allowed me also to show the continuity of their collective experiences. But I don't know if there are filmmakers under you. If you make a film, you maximum use 10% of the material in a film. And I didn't want to, just be the director and then throw away the rest of the 90%. And that's why I published this book, so that the entire stories can actually be read and documented also this way. And this was also important for them individually, because it was me as a filmmaker taking the choice and having actually the power of choice to choose what comes into a film. And this way they became visible also. And and the last book that I wanted to mention is what Lukas already mentioned, Schwarzdeutsch Weiblich. I trace back Black feminist theory actually to the 1700 to 1685, to Juliana Rosina, and every year since, where Black women have actually articulated themselves in whichever way, be it through the written word or even maybe me giving them an existence by writing them into history. But because I didn't want to stop there, 2020, Black Lives Matter, I hope you weren't hiding in a cave or something, because then you would have seen the protests outside in the street, and these are all the books by Black women that, not all of them because I couldn't find all of them, but these are the ones that I could find, and some of them I've read myself, since 2020 only, since 2020, that have been published in a German context by Black German women. And I want to shout out to each and every one of them. I don't know if you're watching online, but I think that writing, this actually shows the depth and the importance that writing in itself has for us as Black women, but as human beings in general.
Thank you so much. Now I can ask both of you here on stage, go maybe in the middle, I go on the side. So, well, we have to talk about writing, obviously. Thank you so much to both of you for these very inspiring presentations. And there's a lot of ground to cover tonight. For the audience, I'll start to break the ice with a couple of questions for the first 15-20 minutes, and then it's really on you to ask questions and use the opportunity to address our invited guests. So I don't know whether we start with Freud and the wonderful Freudian slip, which was too good to be true, or if we continue with the writing. Maybe we start with the writing and we come back to Freud. So both of you made the writing very strong argument for the writing yourself into existence, writing as a healing practice. You showed a lot of books that you were involved with, but also with drawings of yourself. You have to elaborate on this one quickly. And what you did not mention, I believe, Adak, you also did a Ringvorlesung similar to this one with a university in Konstanz or Koblenz? Konstanz and the Charité called Blut und Tinte, Blood and Ink, which looked into actually literature and medicine and the interrelations. So maybe you can start by sharing a little bit about this series. Because it was not mentioned in your talk before, like what you kind of discovered, what motivated you to do this series, and then we connect this again to the kind of healing practice of it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, is the microphone really working? No?
Yeah.
I see Sama saying
no.
Yes, and I don't know.
Now it's working.
And now it's better, no?
Yeah, Blood and Ink, it's something like this for medical students and students of cultural science, and it comes because the Professor Malke from the University of Constance and Professor Sehouli from the Charité have together a project with policemen and women, because they tried to teach the police how to bring the bad message, or also to learn, because in medicine we have the same situation, like the police, women and men have to go to families and say, okay, your son is in an accident, was in an accident, he's dead. And in medicine you have also the situation that you have to say, okay, it's a really bad prognosis and maybe your husband is going to die. So how do you can find the right words? And so the two were connected, and they have the initial idea to connect also the students from the different fields and to bring them together. And maybe the same idea like here, we need literature also for the better understanding of diseases. If we are talking about tuberculosis, we can read Thomas Mann, for example, and learn about aspects that we maybe never are able to learn if you're just learning from the medical literature. And so that was the idea, and we have different topics like pain, and then we look from the medical perspective and from the literature. There will come a professor like from the cultural science and so. But it's really interesting, but it's really difficult for our medical students to join because they have exams, or I don't know what's the point, but it's also a hybrid, so they can join from home. So.
Speaking of medical students, how many medical professional students of sorts or whatever are in the room right now? Nice.
It's me.
Nope. Okay, that was the ghost in the room.
Share the microphone with you.
Is it me?
Last session with a lot of technical difficulties. Thanks for bearing with us. So then we will have to switch microphones. So you saw, I don't know, was it half or was it maybe a quarter? That kind of. Do you need help?
I think I'm fine.
Okay. And that's very new, because when we started in the beginning of the semester, there were basically no medical practitioners here, or maybe a handful, and this has really changed over the course of the semester, which is a beautiful sign, actually, that you're all coming here. And then there is a kind of interprofessional dialogue happening. But how did both of you, because there's many ways to express yourself, writing being one of them. You both work in different fields. We just showed a book on creative writing as therapy with drawings of you. And you spoke of a film that you made, but how did you find your kind of artistic practice in the context of kind of the therapeutic power that lies within them?
I think I've always written. As a young girl, I was always writing. I used to, as a 5-6-year-old, write my little stories about fairies in the woods and you name it. I've always written. And then as a teenager, I used to write diary. So that was a different form of writing. Started writing poems. I write and songs, and because I don't play an instrument, so I'll be knocking something to make melody and all that to go with it. So writing has always been my form of expression. And when I got to university, it became. So I learned a new form of writing, let's put it that way, and that's theoretical writing. Or academic writing. That's a whole different form of writing. Yeah, I remember because I used to study English as well, English philology. I don't know what that is in English, but my professor back then, she would always used to say, Natasha, you're not an academic. You are such an essayistic writer, and we do not need that form of writing in academia. And I was like, oh no, I was like, okay. So it was literally about learning a different form of writing and a different way of expressing myself and looking at the world much more analytically than emotionally. I think that's the difference in writing. But then, especially through the books of Sisters and Souls, when I was then training others to write or supporting others, empowering others to write, writing is also two-dimensional. Literally, in the literal sense of word, you have paper and pen. It's two dimensions. But in what we were trying to express and in emotions, you need the body. And so I swore to myself, okay, this is something, I'm going to bring this book to the stage. And that's how I started in theatre. Literally started and then adapted these books, some of my books, to theatre plays and theatre performances, where it was then writing became the basis or the script of the piece, but it was a different form of expression, and it was the same with film as well. You have interviews, you have interview questions, and first of all I would write down the question, but then it's filled with life, the writing itself. And so for me, writing is the basis of all the work that I do. Doesn't matter if I'm curating, if I'm making a film, if I'm doing theatre, or actually writing a book. which is also collective work, right? I think we, especially non-fiction, we have this very romanticized idea that you're sitting in the hamper somewhere on the beach and writing a book. Maybe people write like that, but I think it's a very analytical tool as well, writing. Very analytical performance also. You know?
Question goes for you too, how you came to
Yeah, I think I felt it before, but I learned it in my education as a psychoanalyst that the spoken word is something that we own very late in life. So we started as children with our body and our feelings, emotions, and we express them in pain, or we express them in different ways. We run away, we dance, I don't know. But actually we are very focused on words. And I think living in Germany as a daughter of migrants, so my parents are from Iran, I was I tried so hard to speak well German, so it was really important for me that there's no difference in hearing. So my whole life I was so focused in the word that I lost the fact that there's so many other necessary ways of expression. And later then I found how helpful it is to use these old forms that I used as a child, and not just using this analytic way of thinking and expressing, and also in relationships, the communication has so many dimensions. And then I started to write again, like I also wrote diary, and it was so important for me because living in an Iranian family in the puberty, you say, it was really hard. So I wrote everything in my diary. I can't go to the birthday because it's too late. Things like that. But maybe now it's funny, but those things help because you have, and this is from the psychoanalytic view very obviously, you have a third thing between the problem and yourself. They came the text or the lyric or the poem or the picture or the music, and this is the third thing. So you have something like a triangle, and this triangle makes things so much easier because the pressure is away from these 2 points. I don't know if it's a little bit abstract, but I think it's easy. It's just a triangle of help in a situation where you need help and you can help yourself, so you're activating yourself, and this is great.
Maybe picking up on what you just mentioned, you said like actually language comes relatively late to us, when 10 or whatever, that we start to express or can express ourselves more fluent in a language, in a written form in particular. So the kind of non-verbal aspect, we talked about a lot of different forms of art-based therapies here in this lecture series, and how certain ones are more accessible than others. And writing, so music therapy, for example, last time, writing was mentioned in this context as being a little bit exclusive, because you have to first of all be literate to do it, or be, have power over the language. But it's interesting now, maybe coming back to these kind of art-based practices or non-verbal art-based practices. You just mentioned them, and I remember a slide where you showed the cave painting. So there's like pre-language. Could we maybe both share your thoughts on this? Because you mentioned also the bodily dimension, the corporal dimension of all the spoken word, and maybe other non-verbal art-based therapy forms that you also use or experience in your daily clinical practice. Maybe start with you and then pass the mic to you.
So normally in the psychosomatic world we have music therapy.
Can you maybe quickly, for the what is psychosomatic? What does that mean?
Okay, psychosomatic is a specialization in medicine regarding somatic aspects and psychotherapy. So patients, for example, with a depression, they can have stomach pain, And we as psychosomatic doctors, we have to find out if there is maybe gastritis or ulcera. So we make the diagnostic, or we ask the patient to go to the right place to make the diagnostic. And if there is something, we treat the patient, or the other physicians treat the patients, but we also start to understand the psychodynamic. Why is it coming always again, this pain in the stomach? And maybe there is no gastritis, and we have to talk about it, and maybe we start a psychotherapy. But I recognize in my working that psychotherapy is a good point. It's very necessary, very helpful. But we can also try to touch the patients in another way, with art therapy, with music therapy. And these are the common therapies in the psychosomatic field, and also in psychiatry, or in the field of rehabilitation. We have also those therapies, or psychotherapy we have often there. But also now we have, like I said, we have writing therapies, but the problem is in hospital there's no money for that. So writing therapy we have to pay from somewhere else. We have to find somebody who's helping us, and normally it's not allowed because we have to manage it with our money that we have in the hospital. But yeah, these are the possibilities. And body therapy, of course, or I don't know, Feldenkrais, I don't know the English word, but yeah, these are the therapies that we are using.
Non-verbal.
Yeah, non-verbal.
I think that there are, long before there was the written word, there were non-verbal communication forms, right? So if we look back to the old Egyptian pharaohs drawing in the caves, or in the pyramids, or wherever, or even color, I think, is also a form of communication. If you use different color, blue symbols this, and green, everybody would automatically think of grass and the sky, and yellow is the sun. And if we look at, for example, children's drawings, we can see that very clearly, that these symbols or colors represent certain things. We have different forms of writing. If we look at the symbolic Ashanti, Adinkra symbols, the Sankofa, for example, some of you might know, which have very specific meaning. The Sankofa especially meaning go back and fetch it, meaning practically if you have to know your past, bring your past into the present to be able to create the future. And this is, if you go to Ghana, if you go to Accra, you will see these symbols everywhere, on walls, on doors, on entrances, etc. pp. So there are many forms of communication, even body language, no? And I'm not even going into the performance, but if I smile at you, for example, yeah, or if people always tell me that my face always, tells how I feel, because I have this very intense expression in my face, and people will always say, "Oh, why do you look so angry?" And I'm not even angry at that point, but I'm just so in my thought that it gives a certain facial expression. So that is also a form of he knows what I'm talking about. But so this is also a form of communication. And because I come from communications, it wasn't only about looking at language, and then we have to think which language was my first language as a child was English, but coming from the Caribbean, a very specific form of English. But then I grew up in Germany, so having to learn German. Now, after all these years, German has become my first language, the language I feel. So it's also foreign language. What is a foreign language? Or, first language, second language, and so on. So all of these things add up so much. I think even being in the arts, a picture says more than 1,000 words. I think that is literally an example for it, why I found my way to the arts, because I was dealing with topics like racism and sexism, and got to a point where I was like, okay, nobody even wants to understand what I am talking about. But when you pull out a picture and you say, here, everybody was like, it was end of debate, no? Otherwise it was, oh, Natasha, you're being very interpretive. Isn't that very subjective? You're analyzing, da-da-da-da. And then you hold a picture and everybody would be, yeah, okay. And they would see the same thing you would see, you know? So also that is a different form of communication, of speaking, of non-verbal communication. I think there are so many levels, even non-speaking, not speaking, not saying certain things is also important, is also a form of communication. Yeah, especially in a racist context. Why don't people mention that they're white, for example? This then becomes the neutral center of the universe, yeah? But from my perspective, I'm always like, okay, so I will never be neutral, right? I'll never be objective, and so on and so on. So it's not only what you say, it's also what you don't say that is also important. And I can go on and on and on and on, because there are so many things that are relevant for this topic when it comes to writing or the written word as such.
Maybe I can pick on this one, because not saying what is important is kind of key of psychoanalysis to my understanding, and maybe I'm trying now to build a bridge between the topic of your first semester here at the UDK and maybe a basic psychoanalytic practice. So Natasha just started this semester, and it's under the topic of amnesia. So you bring in basically a pathological term or medical term. I think it's because it's a tricky one. Amnesia is not only the loss of memory or information or context, but the unwillingness or the inability to learn new information.
And also selective memory.
And selective memory.
That's also important, and this is exactly what I'm saying. So what you choose to talk about and what you choose to remember is also very political, right? If you look outside on the streets, for example, which statues do you see? Who is reminded of? Which street names are written down? From which perspective do we remember the colonial past? Definitely not from the colonized perspective, or let's say since a few years white street names are being changed. This is when new perspectives come in. So this is a form of colonial amnesia. Yeah,
and maybe we can combine this all under the umbrella of kind of healing also to, I guess, what psychoanalysis is also about, that you showed like the tip of the iceberg as an image for psychoanalysis. There's something showing, but there's, the majority of the iceberg is underwater. So there's also cases of amnesia, I would say. Everything under the water is kind of forgotten. So maybe we can connect these two, and also how the uncovering, or you call it the writing yourself into existence, or writing as a form of resistance, in connection to a psychoanalytic approach, where you also try the uncovering basically as a therapeutic process.
I think this process is one of the most difficult processes of life, and we are never ending with this process of making things uncovered, you said. And in German we say, I don't know the English word, it's Abwehrmechanismen. How do you say that?
Defense mechanisms.
Mm-hmm. Defense mechanisms, exactly. And to forget things is very important for us, as it makes us it makes us safe, like a child who plays and something is broken, and the child knows, if I'm telling my mom that this thing is broken, she will die because it will break her heart. And this child, the psyche of this child, can make things unhappen. And so the mother asking, have you broke this thing? And the child said, no. But this is not a lie. The child can't remember, because the psyche helps the child in this moment, and because the child feels the mother, and the child don't want the mother be sad or angry or broken. So this is what psyche makes. And the work to uncover such experiences and such moments of pain, this is hard work. And not everybody wants that.
And I can understand that not everybody wants that, because it can destroy your life if you can really touch all the things in this bottom of the iceberg. But I think it is the most richness, can we say that? The most richness to have the possibility and the ability to try it and to face it and to work with it, because that makes us really a little bit more autonomous, because we have the power about our own history and about our own being. So I think it's a big, big need to try it. And if we are too weak or if we are afraid, then we can have help from other people who are educated and help us. And you talked about history and colonization. I think this is not a question if somebody wants, because this is a social thing. This is a need. We have to do that as a society. And I think in Germany, I'm grown up here, but I know that there's a big problem with this, because we see it now in the politics that there is a big problem. Even if we are learned every year again about the time, the World War I, World War II, and we learn, and my friend said, oh, I can't hear it anymore, I don't want to learn it every year again and again and again. But maybe it was not the right way of confrontation or discovering, uncovering this history.
Yeah, I agree with, but I would like to emphasize the difference between the individual and the structural level, because the metaphor that you used with the child and the pain, that is on an individual level. I 100% agree with that. But when it comes to the structural level, it's not about hiding pain and you're not a child. It's very romanticized. Then it's about guilt. It's about historical guilt. It's about and also that is connected to historical pain, obviously. But I think that it's also about power. And this is something that we're not allowed to forget. It's a collective or selective perception. No? Also kollektive Wahrnehmung is also a way to induce power and to strengthen power. And that's what happens on the structural level. So it's not about, we're so sorry and we don't want to remember. It's literally about, we gained so much, so let's not talk about it, how we got to all our riches. And that, I think, is really a different story that I have to mention at this point, because otherwise it's very romanticizing the idea behind my whole seminar, which is not about, it's more looking from a structural level, but also how the individual and the structural is actually interconnected. I think that is important, and going through, that's where I also agree with you, going through the process of actually accepting this as also being part of your history. Because my experience was, especially when I think back at school, we stopped at National Socialism. Yeah, and sometimes when I ask my students, they can barely pinpoint when the First World War was, or what happened, or what the First World War was about, or that Germany actually lost its colonies after First World War, and so on and so on. And I think that it's also a selective way of dealing with National Socialism, because you cannot fully understand National Socialism without also understanding German colonialism, where the nation was actually built, where the nation was founded, and that's the first word in National Socialism is actually the nation. So you have to understand that to be able to fully understand how National Socialism actually came about. And these ideas were well before National Socialism. There were concentration camps in Africa, on the African continent, and so on and so forth. The whole racial ideology it was brought to the absolute climax through the opposite, actually. It was to the most deadliest point in National Socialism, but it started way before. And I think that is really important to understand. And I agree with you that maybe to ease yourself from this guilt, that you would say, oh, we'll start here, and we won't look back at the other bloody wars and genocides that we did. Yeah, but we need to go through that pain. And that's what I'm trying to teach, a way of finding words, to bring it back to the topic, to actually deal with that as we all are members of this society, and we all stand in this historical guilt.
But maybe apart from kind of the context now, and then this is my last question before I give the mic to you guys, or questions, yeah? But more on a meta level. No, this is very much, now we talk a lot about writing and finding words and the therapeutic part of it, the healing aspect, or the practice in everyday clinical use. And I think what connects now what you just mentioned to what I would guess also in the therapeutic work in the medical context is this combination of the autobiographical and the structural. That's how I described your work earlier, but how like the individual comes into play, the biographical story, but also a structural, where there's more, there's patterns laying behind it. So how, to you, Adak, how does that show in your work as a psychosomatic doctor and as a psychoanalyst, where these two kind of interfere, mix, juxtapose the more individual, the autobiographical, and the structural? And again, because this is mainly about art and medicine and healing here, in the context of in the medical context of healing. Can I now get your questions ready? Yeah? Don't worry, there's no such thing as a stupid question.
I think the structure point or perspective is really important for the individual understanding of the, for example, unconsciousness, because we say in psychosomatic or in psychotherapy that 3 generations will earn the experiences. We say 3 generations, and then if the person reflect these experiences of the grandmother, maybe she can auflösen it. She can solve it. Yeah. So this is a theory. I don't know if it's true, but it is really important. If I make psychotherapy with a patient, I'm there to understand this person, and it's really important to have that this person, this patient, really trust on me, no matter what he's going to talk about. I mean, sometimes we have patients who are pedophile or very aggressive, or they did something really, really wrong. So, but I'm the therapist for this patient at this moment, and I have to be there for him or for her. And the first thing is to understand this moment, and then if the trust in the relationship is built, then we can start to understand the history and everything, the structure and the idea. So I have patients who try to understand maybe how the grandfather worked with the Nazis, and this is really difficult in every individual, because there is the thing that we talked about. There is shame, there is pain, there is everything, but this is the only way, the only way to go and to understand and to solve things, to point it and to work with that. But this is a really difficult work with the individual.
And how do the arts help in that?
Yeah, arts help because sometimes you can express yourself, or you find something in art that that shows you something that you didn't knew before. For example, I had a patient last week, and she came with a post-COVID symptomatic to me, and the first time when I met her, she was like, she talked about her problems, and then she went to a rehabilitation. And in the rehabilitation, she has a psychologist. And she talked to her a lot, and she gave her a book about die Kinderverschleppung. That was in German history, that the children get to monasteries, also Kloster, monasteries for getting healthy and have food after war. And the woman, she brought this book to me, and she said she had post-COVID, nothing. There's no relation. For me, there were no relation to this experience, and I didn't knew about this experience. But in the rehabilitation, they get this point, and the therapist, she was, I don't know how she get this point, but the woman said, when I saw this picture, and she showed me a picture, I understood that I suffered from this situation. When I was a child, I was in this situation, like I see it in the picture. And maybe it's difficult for me to explain it even in English, but the connection between actual symptoms and this history was, for the patient, in this moment when she saw the picture, it was a solution that we maybe never could find by words or by talking, or we have to talk maybe years to find this point. But while finding the right picture, something happened. It's like a door is it's open, and it's so fast, and sometimes it's on the point, and that helps me and also the patients often.
Very similar to what you said earlier, that you spoke and spoke, you showed an image and everyone understood.
Yeah.
But now to you guys. Who dares? Yes, in the back row. You have to speak up very loud, and I have to repeat it for the online audience. As you like, whatever you feel comfortable with.
I'm born here.
You're born here and you can speak Persian?
Yes.
Oh, nice. Salam. Unfortunately, we have some gaps between the language, and also I think it is the problem to live here, but we try to overcome some of the problems and tackle them. But I have this problem that she mentioned, related to finding, for example, special words to have the same and similar, and how can I tell you, homogeneous type of language with the other people here, because we are different, for example, slangs or metaphors in Persian, and also the other people from, for example, Germany or other nationality have the other type of the language, and it is really a problem to express our feeling or emotion or something like this. And another question related to Abu Ali Sina that you showed, the doctor, she mentioned one of the ancient doctor practitioner in my country, Abu Ali Sina. Did you find any evidence-based medicine related to psychosomatic and herbal medicine and his research or not? Because you know that what it goes down woman. And also some of the other herbs, like lavender, can help us for some of the problems for psychological disorder and something like this. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So that's very difficult to repeat for the online audience, but let me try. Well, definitely number one is, again, the barrier of language, or how different languages have different words, different forms of expression, and then many things being lost in translation, basically. But I think the other key point in our context was what we know as Avencina, the Persian medical doctor, philosopher, polymath, and there was a question if there's any evidence-based research on Avencina's, I hope I could pronounce it correctly, research into herbal medicine. Correct? Yes. Okay, so that was the question.
It's so funny hearing you with these questions, because I studied medicine here in Germany, and we have the subject history of medicine. And history in medicine starts in Germany with the 4 Jews education, 4 Säfte-Lehre in German. And I was like, okay, it's really strange because they're talking about yellow juices and red juice and blood, and I was like, what are they talking about? Okay, but this is the starting of medicine. And then later I read about Avicenna, and I was, oh my God, and it's a country of my parents, and he knew so much things, and he was operating the eye, and there are books about how he was operating the eye. But there is really a big gap, and maybe it's also a little bit this arrogant Eurocentristic way of thinking that everything starts in Europe.
Oh,
but
yes.
I mean, medicine is so much older, and the traditional Chinese medicine as well. But with Avicenna, the problem is really the Arabic letters, because there are not so much things which are translated, and so I don't think that they are really evidence-based like we have today. I think there is nothing. But okay, there are studies, also newer studies about herbals and food and everything. But Avicenna or Imsina is something that I never learned here in Germany at university about him. But we all know this film, Der Medicus, it was about him.
But, speaking of untold stories, by the way, or also amnesia in the historical, the medical education.
That's a beautiful example, yeah.
Another question, comment could also be fine. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, I'll try to address the question to both speakers, even though the backgrounds are kind of on the opposite ends of the spectrum almost. What should we be careful about when implementing art therapy or writing therapy for patients? Because evidence-based medicine, yes, we have a lot of magical solutions to problems that were basically a death sentence a few decades ago. But they also have sometimes quite heavy risk profiles and quite unpleasant side effects. And when you invoked the metaphor of the iceberg, I immediately had to kind of wince a little bit and ask myself, is the stuff that we find in the unconscious, is it always fact-based? Is it always a response to a painful event? Or, as unfortunately we've seen in some forensic cases, can this part of the self, of the consciousness, can that level be tampered with by accident, not even maliciously? What is your stance on that? And Natasha, writing has been, I guess, writing has been a constant in your life and has been very empowering. But since I asked about the side effects, have you encountered any crises or any kind of painful experiences with writing?
Okay, I'll try to. This is the toughest job here tonight, always. No, but basically side effects, to sum it up in a way, or like the Packungsbeilage, we say in German, like when what as a therapist, a doctor, or as a writer, what do you have to be? I think you call it what you have to be aware of when entering in these processes with patients or with the audience, and what could be the potential side effects of it?
Well, first of all, I would say from my individual point of view, of course, every day I have writing blockades. It's not like I sit there and I write 10 pages or something. There are days I can write 10 pages and there are days that I can't even get 3 words on paper. I think that's a normal thing. But also, especially in writing my last book, Schwarz-Deutsch-Weiblich, it was a form of therapy for me too, because I wrote a lot of stories out of my life that a lot of people didn't really know, and I shared a lot of my soul in that book. So and I think that was it costed a lot of strength and a lot of courage, and it led me to put the pen down, so to say. But obviously I was typewriting, but in a more than once. Because then I had to sit back and even reflect, because it was doing something to me at the same time, writing this down, no? And I had to be conscious of that. And I remember that my publisher said to me, of course, we're only going to publish what you actually want to be published. And during this whole editing process also, asking me, are you fine with this? No, because there will be readers reading, obviously, what I hope. But there were very intimate episodes in that book, and so that. And I would like to add to your first question as well, because this is something that you mentioned. Sorry, I don't have your name, but from Iran. And it goes to that, when you're talking about evidence-based or facts, what are we actually talking about? And I think that's how I would answer your question, because it's even this what is evidence-based is programmed by society, and that brings us to the structural level. That's what I'm trying to talk to make the difference, right? That everything we learn, especially in institutions, be it in school, be it at university, it doesn't matter which discipline, has been taught to us by somebody with a certain mindset and certain mind patterns. So these mind patterns are repetitive and are repeated through society, and this is what creates the structure, and it also creates a structure of thinking, a structure of interpretation, a structure of analysis, and what then at the end we called evidence-based and fact. And I think that we have to be aware of that when we're writing, that I write from a certain point of view, from a certain position, and I also read and analyze from a certain point, and I have a certain perspective on the world. And this perspective on the world will also shape the way I read, it will shape the way I understand the text, and not only the way I create a text or the written or write words myself, then it's quite obvious, but also the way I perceive words, the way I teach, the way I communicate in general. This is all based through my socialization, being a black woman in the West, mid-Europe, Germany, etc. pp. So these are all things that will definitely form the way that I analyze things. And it's definitely a problem that we have as black feminists. Exactly what she says is that why I said earlier that we have over 100 years of written word from black feminist perspectives, but we don't have our own literaturgenre, So this is because the white man, if I'm allowed to use that metaphor, has not accepted us as our own genre. No? So this is what I'm trying to say, that the structure, who decides what's evidence-based, who decides what's literature, who decides what's good or bad academia, and so on, is very much programmed and structured into this entire society. So I think that is something when you're teaching, and it doesn't matter if you're teaching art or in a medical context, that you have to be well aware of, that you're looking through a lens of through a structural lens, because you're taught to see things also in a very specific way. And this is the work that I'm trying to do, to break out of that lens and be reflective of yourself first before you can reflect others. I think that's really, really important.
Now, bringing back the question to the side effects of working with diverse patients, into you, Adak.
Yeah, and I want to start with the other thing, the unconsciousness. Is it real? You asked what we are going to find. Does it happen like that, or is it if I understand it right, or is it something that our conscious maybe makes? And Sigmund Freud talked about the family story. This is the idea of us, how our family works. But this is not always reality. This is what we wished, or what we think, or maybe we have the idea, or we want to have the idea, my mother was a perfect woman, so my mother then is a perfect woman for me. And not everything what we will find in the unconsciousness is the truth, but me as a therapist, for me, this is not important if this is truth. It is important to understand something, to learn something with a patient. This is the first thing. And the second, with the side effects, sure, you can have side effects while doing creative therapy. And I know that my colleagues are working really hard for certifications, that not everybody can make everything. Because maybe you can make a re-traumata, for example. So that's why you have really always, but if you're working with patients, if you're working with humans, you have to reflect first yourself. And I think this is also sometimes a problem in physicians or in doctors, because if you don't know about your own sexuality, how do you want to talk with your patients about sexuality? So you have to start by yourself, and then you can treat your patients, and then you can deal with side effects, because sure, you will have those side effects. That's true, because we talked about pain, we talked about shame, we talked about all these feelings. So this is it's a danger. Yeah.
Anne, you had a question as well. I think it might be too long. Yeah.
So I wonder, following this question on adverse events, whether there is some kind of differential indication, whether you offer writing therapy or something non-verbal creative therapy to a person. I think that something, a verbal therapy like writing therapy might overstrain a patient, because it's, well, needs some maybe high intellectual starting point. What do you think?
So I have to repeat it. The question is following up basically on the previous question, is there a differential indication in the usage of different forms of therapy? With the example of writing therapy being maybe, that's what I said earlier as well, it's a little bit exclusive, because you first of all have to write and then have to be able to express your feelings in words. That takes, quite a lot of practice. So, yeah.
But you can, yeah, that's true. But first of all, you can adapt the level. So it can start very easy. You can start art therapy by painting with just colors, without any text contours, or without a picture of a tree. You don't have to paint the tree. Or while writing, you just can use words. But you are right, there are differences. For example, I learned in my education that, for example, music can be really difficult for patients who have a problem in the structure. And a problem in the structure, I think, means something different that we talked before. It means in psychosomatic we have different levels of structure depending to the possibilities a patient owns. For example, to communicate with others, to communicate with themselves, to control the impulses. Some patients, like borderline patients, they have big problems with that. And it's more difficult for such patients to give them just the music and say, okay, what do you feel now?
This is too difficult for them because they will be afraid, and you get the side effects are much stronger because they're afraid and maybe they scream or something. So there are some things you have to talk deeply with the patient. You have to understand a little bit of the structure of the patient before you decide what therapy is the right one. But then you can, if you know about the patient, then you can adapt also the form of therapy, and you can decide, okay, I make music therapy, but I don't give him very classical music, which is very aggressive or something. I just start with instruments which are easy or have just one sound or something like that.
Great, there's one in the back, then you, and then you. So that's the last three questions, let's say, in the room, with the beanie on.
Yeah.
No, you can also sit as you like, but we can hear you better like that.
Natasha, this one was for you. You said,
Uh-oh. No, I've been quoted.
Your site is being disrupted by the outside.
Yeah.
For racial problems or other
Yeah.
problems like this. You also said children can be affected by things that happen before their birth. And I think this is a really big problem that we will always face as long as this is not really addressed. Because there are various belief systems that like keep people closed in their own things. And as a feminist, you also already mentioned like we're still living kind of in the white man's world where black women have a relative small amount of time where you could come up with literature and your writing. So how can you kind of close this gap in this world with ever fasting exchanges and information?
You're meaning the gap between, that's a big one.
A big gap.
The gap between the white-dominated world and the black feminist perspective?
That like now, there's a big like.
Sure,
I understood the question.
Yeah,
now.
$1 billion question. I'm trying to repeat it for the online audience.
There's still a very big dominance of what white men in general on Earth, like on the Western world, have for a footprint. So, like, how can we?
So how can you create counter narratives to white male dominated structure, narrative, etc.?
Yeah, and bridge the gap. I literally
Yeah.
get the question. I think with everything that I do, for example, I write. That's literally what writing yourself into existence means, because it's not about what we were forced to do, especially growing up in Germany. And this is not only my individual experience, but collective experience. Is we're forced to walk in the white man's footsteps. Yeah. But what we actually don't see is that next to these footsteps there is another path. Yeah. And to learn to see that path, and that your shoes actually fit better into those footprints. That is what I do, no? But it is the work to make this other path visible, to even offer another view to the world that is accepted in a white majority society. That's the challenge. And if I personally will be able to bridge that gap, no, I don't think so. But I could think that I can take one footstep at a time. And I think that if we carry on in that direction, that in 100 years from now, there will be two parallel footsteps in the sand. And that's what I deeply believe in. And that's the way how I think we can bridge it. I'm not saying that the footsteps of the white man is solely negative. Yeah, there were great white thinkers. Yeah, one of my favorite, Walter Benjamin, for example. No, he's one I will always quote. Yeah, I'm not saying that they were all bad and they weren't all racist, but what I am saying is some of them were racist. Yeah, and that we have to talk about that to be able to make the other path visible, because I don't want to be walking in those racist footsteps, because this is how I internalize what is being put. The notion of what is in those footsteps if that makes sense. But in that sense, I want the chance and the option to be able to step out, but to keep on going. Yeah, and if that's the metaphor, that makes sense for you. Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you. Manya, good question.
I have a question. You said before that, I mean, working at Curated is a very big privilege and that you have many possibilities that other hospitals maybe do not have. But you also said there's not enough money to actually practice the art in the medicine as much as you prefer. So how is that, or how can you, is there a possibility to make it more accessible for patients which really need to have the practice in their way of healing?
That's actually, you're touching a big topic that was raised a couple of times. So repeating for our online audience, that you mentioned that you work in a privileged situation at the Charité. It's a huge institution, a medical institution. However, and there is forms of art therapy being offered, but what is actually the real accessibility? And this also goes, maybe following up on your question on how much is it accepted? You cannot get art therapy on a recept, for example. So, yeah, how can that be more accessible? Or actually, what are also the barriers now? Real talk, apart from the idealistic part.
I think one point is that we have colleagues in the Charité as well who are very open-minded. So 2 of them are here, or 3 of them are here. And Anna Berghofer, for example, worked on this Kunst and Charité Netzwerk. Professor Sehouli makes this creative therapy possible in gynecology, which is not very common. So this is something, nothing to do with money. We need money, but we have colleagues which are doing their work because they really wanted to do that, and they want to treat and they want to heal. I'm sure in other hospitals we have the same situation. There are some colleagues, but we can connect together. My chief is very open-minded. We have no money, again, but he's open-minded. And this is always the first step that you need. You need persons who say, okay, Adak, just try it. Because if I started with the post-COVID thing in the ambulance, and my chief said, what do you need? And I said, okay, I will make verbal therapy, group therapy, but I need the creative therapies. Without creative therapies, I can't work. And he said, okay, so we try to make it possible, and we made it possible. And these are things that I really like in my work, that this is possible, and I have the time for things like that. And I hope that it will be more and more, and we develop a little bit. But it's so funny because this is something that we had in the past, So it's like we are going steps back, and now we are going forward. But it's always like waves.
Okay. So coming kind of full circle, also thank you for mentioning the title of the series again, The Healing Arts. What are we doing here actually?
Where are we?
And also we already went over time, but what is the key factor for healing, and now in particular in writing? Maybe both of you with a short and comprehensive.
Short. I don't know if I could even separate that, and I don't believe in art for art's sake neither. And that is just a philosophy in my understanding of art. I would 100% go with W.E.B. Du Bois, who says art is propaganda and ever will be. And that's what I believe. And not propaganda in a negative sense, as we know in a German context, but in the context of actually always has a message. Art always has, if it's intended or not, there is so much in the visual like it is in the written word. And I don't, even if you intend to say something or not, there's no such thing as art for art's sake. That's something very Eurocentric that only white men are allowed to do, by the way. Yeah. And I think that alongside writing yourself into existence, which then means creating identity, is also a form of representation. It can also be entertainment, it can be education, and it can be all of these things together. Yeah. It always has a social context. There is nothing outside of the social. And that's why I think that there is no such thing as art for art's sake. It's always created in a social context. And I mean every word, every picture, every piece of music. It's always in a social context, and therefore always has another meta layer to it, which somebody will listen to Beethoven and hear this, and the next person will listen to Beethoven and hear something completely different. And the third person will hear Beethoven and be reminded of their childhood and how great it was to do this and that. You know what I mean? So it is always connected to the social. Art, culture and communication are two sides of the same medal. That's something that you cannot separate.
And I think art is something that can help to heal. It's not the healing. And if you have a patient, for example, with a big problem like a cancer, then art can't heal him. That's obviously, you need chemotherapy, you need operation.
Exactly.
But art can help to make quality of life better, because you can get rid of tensions that every human being has, but patients have them maybe more because they have a big crisis at this moment. And this is something that it's an add-on, a good add-on, and an easy add-on.
Yeah.
There's a special question again. Professor Sehouli, you wanted to ask something, a comment or no?
Comment.
Okay.
So thank you very much. Again, I'm very impressed by your dialogue. So only a teaser. It's a big debate in medicine. Medicine is not as 100 years before. So don't start to stereotype things for the patients beside healing and non-healing.
Yeah.
And this is the discussion we started in medicine, in the modern medicine, to look what is beneficial. So it can be quality of life, it can be the patient's perspective. So, and I have just checked, in German it's called heilsam, beneficial, salutary. And this is a key misunderstanding. If you start to bring integrative medicine into the story and you start with the discussion of healing, you always lose. Because most of the things we do in medicine are not with healing. And it's even unfair, because healing is 5-10 years, because you want benefit now. And this, I think, maybe a debate for your wonderful lecture. We need a new definition to make it open. Otherwise, you always lose, because otherwise you say, where's the evidence? But for pain management, I don't need big evidence that this is beneficial for the patient without the impact of overall survival benefits. So this is something what we have to accept. It's a part of medicine. And if you think about WHO health, it's social, physical, and psychological well-being. This is a definition. It's not cancer.
Social, thank you for including
And this
that.
is the
That's
key.
really
So we have to go
important,
back
Yeah.
to the original definition, and let's start to take it as granted. So that, again, thank you very much for your impact, because we need you to change the horrible system.
Oh, wow.
It's a wonderful call to action. So give a warm applause to our fantastic speaker, Natasha, Adak. Thank you so much. This was a wonderful call to action at the end. A wonderful closing also of, you gave the best closing for a semester of encounters between art and medicine. And I thank you all for coming. Please, if you came here for the first time, check it out on the website. There will be also an individual website where all these videos are put on, so you can really dive in. As I said in the beginning, due to the popular demand, we will continue the series in the next semester. It's now open, and you can always come, bring your friends, and let's engage in this kind of discussion further. Thank you so much for being here.